The crack of flesh against flesh echoed across the parade ground like a gunshot, silencing 300 voices in an instant. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The only sound was the flag snapping in the desert wind as a two-star general stood frozen, his hand still raised from the blow he'd just delivered to the face of a woman in a mechanic's coveralls. What happened in the next 10 seconds would shatter everything those witnesses thought they knew about power, about respect, and about the quiet woman who had been invisible among them for 3 months. Because the general had just made the worst mistake of his military career. He had just struck someone whose true identity would leave him wishing he could disappear into the sand beneath his feet. The morning sun cast long shadows across Bagram Air Base as the transport truck rumbled through the main gate, its engine coughing black smoke into the thin Afghan air. In the back, wedged between supply crates and a broken generator, sat a woman whose unremarkable appearance would have made her invisible in any crowd. Her name, according to the manifest, was Elena Vasquez, civilian contractor, automotive maintenance specialist. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Military Honor Stories so you never miss these incredible tales of courage and sacrifice. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? Elena wore standard-issue coveralls that had seen better years, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that did nothing to enhance features that were pleasant but forgettable. As the truck lurched to a stop near the motor pool, she gathered her single duffel bag and climbed down with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to arriving at new places alone. The motor pool sergeant, a weathered man named Kowalski with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails, barely looked up from his clipboard as she approached. "You the new mechanic?" he asked, his tone suggesting civilian contractors ranked somewhere below the broken equipment they were brought in to fix. "Elena Vasquez," she replied, her voice carrying no accent despite the Spanish surname. "Reporting for assignment." Kowalski squinted at his paperwork. "Says here you've got experience with heavy vehicles. That right?" "Among other things," Elena said. The response was neutral, professional, but something in her posture, the way she stood with perfect balance, the way her eyes automatically scanned the perimeter even during casual conversation, suggested depths that her mundane job description didn't reveal. "Well, we got plenty of broken-down MR apps and Humvees that need fixing," Kowalski said, already walking away. "Tool shed's over there. Don't touch anything you're not qualified to work on, and stay out of the way when the real mechanics are working." Elena nodded without reaction to the casual dismissal. She'd heard variations of this speech before, in different languages, in different countries, under different names. The assumption that civilian contractors were lesser beings was as predictable as sunrise. She collected her gear assignments and made her way to the small trailer that would serve as her quarters, passing groups of soldiers who glanced at her with the mild curiosity reserved for new arrivals before dismissing her entirely. Her trailer was a metal box equipped with a narrow bed, a small desk, and a footlocker that would hold everything she officially owned. Elena unpacked efficiently, placing her few personal items with military precision. At the bottom of her duffel, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was a small notebook with worn edges. She opened it briefly, scanning pages of dense handwriting in multiple languages, then closed it and locked it in the footlocker. That first evening, she sat on the steps of her trailer as the sun set behind the mountains, watching the base come alive with the controlled chaos of a forward operating base. Helicopters thundered overhead, their rotors whipping up clouds of dust. Soldiers moved with purpose between buildings, some heading to chow, others preparing for night patrols. In the distance, she could hear the low rumble of artillery practice and the sharp crack of rifle fire from the ranges. Lieutenant Torres, a young officer making his rounds, stopped when he noticed her sitting alone. "You just get in today?" he asked, his tone friendly but professional. "This afternoon," Elena replied. "How do you like Afghanistan so far?" For just a moment, something flickered in Elena's eyes. Not fear or uncertainty, but recognition. The kind of recognition that came from having been in places like this before, under different circumstances. "It's not my first time in the region," she said carefully. Torres nodded, taking this to mean she'd worked other contractor jobs in the Middle East. "Well, welcome to Bagram. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. We look out for each other here." After he left, Elena remained on the steps until well past midnight, her trained eyes noting guard rotations, vehicle patterns, and the subtle security measures that most people never saw. When she finally went inside, she pulled out the notebook again and made several brief entries before tucking it away. She was not Elena Vasquez, automotive specialist. That woman existed only on paper, a carefully constructed identity with a complete background and work history. But the person inhabiting that identity had learned long ago that the most effective way to see everything was to become invisible to everyone. And tomorrow, her real work would begin. 3 weeks into her assignment, Elena had established herself as competent but unremarkable. She fixed what needed fixing, stayed quiet during briefings, and ate her meals alone in the contractor section of the dining facility. The soldiers had grown accustomed to seeing her around the motor pool, her coveralls usually stained with grease, her hands perpetually dirty from engine work. It was during the morning formation briefing that she first encountered Brigadier General Morrison, a man whose reputation preceded him like a shockwave. Morrison was old-school military, the kind of officer who believed that respect was earned through fear, and that civilian contractors were a necessary evil that diluted the purity of military operations. "What's she doing here?" Morrison's voice cut through the briefing room as his eyes landed on Elena, who sat quietly in the back row with the other contractors. Major Patterson, the base operations officer, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Sir, Ms. Vasquez is our automotive specialist. She's been cleared for these briefings to coordinate maintenance schedules." Morrison's eyes narrowed as he studied Elena. She met his gaze steadily, neither challenging nor deferential, simply present. "I don't like civilians in military briefings," Morrison said. "Security protocols exist for a reason." "Sir, her clearance level has been verified," Patterson began. "I don't care about her clearance level," Morrison snapped. "This is a military briefing for military personnel. Contractors can get their information secondhand." Elena stood smoothly, gathering her notebook. "I'll wait outside, sir," she said, her voice respectful but not apologetic. As she moved toward the door, Morrison's voice followed her. "And next time, make sure you understand the hierarchy here. This isn't some civilian garage where everyone's equal." A murmur of discomfort rippled through the room. Several officers shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with Morrison's public humiliation of a contractor. But Elena simply nodded and left without comment, her expression unchanged. Outside the briefing room, she encountered Staff Sergeant Williams, a grizzled NCO who had served multiple deployments. "Don't let the general get to you," Williams said quietly. "He's been in a mood since he got here. Takes it out on everyone, but especially civilians and women." "I appreciate the heads up," Elena replied. "How long has he been on base?" "About a week. Word is he's here to evaluate our security protocols. Apparently, higher-ups are concerned about our readiness levels." Elena filed this information away. An inspector general making surprise evaluations would explain the increased tension she'd noticed among the senior staff. It also meant Morrison was looking for problems to report, and civilian contractors made easy targets. Over the following days, Morrison's pattern became clear. He found fault with everything Elena did, questioning her qualifications, demanding to see her certifications, and making pointed comments about civilian reliability during morning briefings. When she repaired a MRAP transmission ahead of schedule, he accused her of cutting corners. When she identified a parts shortage that could have grounded half the vehicle fleet, he suggested she was trying to justify her continued employment through manufactured problems. The harassment reached a crescendo during a maintenance inspection. Morrison arrived at the motor pool unannounced, his aide trailing behind with a clipboard. Elena was working under the hood of a Humvee, her hands deep in the engine compartment, when Morrison's voice rang out across the shop. "Vasquez, front and center!" Elena emerged from under the hood, wiping her hands on a rag. "Yes, sir?" Morrison circled her workspace like a prosecutor examining evidence. "This vehicle was supposed to be ready yesterday. Why is it still broken?" "Sir, the repair was completed this morning. I'm performing post-maintenance checks to ensure—" "Don't give me excuses," Morrison interrupted. "In the real military, we understand the meaning of deadlines. Lives depend on vehicle readiness. Maybe that concept is too complex for a civilian to grasp." Several soldiers in the motor pool had stopped their work to watch the confrontation. Elena remained perfectly still, her hands at her sides, her breathing controlled. "The vehicle is operational, sir. I was conducting final safety checks." Morrison stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Safety checks? Or covering up substandard work? I've reviewed your file, Vasquez. Automotive specialist with a community college certificate, no military experience, no understanding of what we do here. You're out of your depth." The motor pool had gone completely silent. Even the sound of pneumatic tools had stopped as every soldier in the area focused on the confrontation. Elena's voice, when she spoke, was measured and calm. "Sir, if you have concerns about my work, I'm happy to address them through proper channels." "Proper channels?" Morrison's voice rose. "The proper channel is me telling you that your work is inadequate and your attitude is insubordinate. Maybe it's time to consider whether civilian contractors belong on a military base at all." From across the motor pool, Sergeant Kowalski watched with growing unease. In 3 weeks, Elena had proven herself more skilled than mechanics with years of experience. She'd solved problems that had stumped his entire team and had never once complained about working conditions or long hours. Morrison's assessment was not only unfair, it was completely wrong. But Elena simply nodded. "Understood, sir." Morrison studied her for a long moment, clearly frustrated by her refusal to react. "Clean up this workspace. It's a disgrace to military standards." As Morrison strode away, his aides scurrying to keep up, the motor pool slowly returned to life. But the tension remained, thick and uncomfortable. Elena returned to her work without comment, but several soldiers exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their opinion of Morrison's leadership style. That evening, Elena sat on her trailer steps again, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Lieutenant Torres found her there, as he had several times over the past weeks. "Heard you had a run-in with the general today," he said, settling onto the steps beside her. "Word travels fast," Elena observed. "This is a small base. Everyone knows everything." Torres hesitated before continuing. "For what it's worth, nobody thinks Morrison was being fair. Your work speaks for itself." Elena nodded her appreciation, but said nothing more. In the distance, a patrol was returning through the main gate, their vehicles covered in dust from the roads beyond the wire. The sight triggered something in Elena's memory, not fear, but recognition of a world she knew better than most people realized. "Torres," she said finally, "how well do you know the general's background?" "Morrison? Career infantry officer, multiple combat tours, decorated veteran. Why?" "Just curious about his leadership style," Elena said. But she was thinking about more than leadership. She was thinking about patterns, about men who confused authority with respect, about the dangerous assumptions people made when they looked at her and saw only what they expected to see. Tomorrow, she would continue to be Elena Vasquez, automotive specialist. But tonight, she opened her notebook and made several new entries in handwriting that was too precise, too controlled for someone whose only training had come from community college. The crisis began, as most crises do, with something small that cascaded into something much larger. Elena was in the motor pool before dawn, performing routine maintenance on a convoy of vehicles scheduled for a morning patrol, when she noticed something that made her pause. The brake lines on 3 separate Humvees showed signs of stress fractures, hairline cracks that were nearly invisible but potentially catastrophic. In civilian vehicles, such wear might develop over years of normal use. In military vehicles with proper maintenance schedules, it should have been impossible. Elena spent the next hour conducting a thorough inspection of the entire fleet. What she found made her stomach tighten with a familiar dread. 12 vehicles showed similar signs of systematic neglect: brake components worn beyond safe limits, steering assemblies with excessive play, transmission mounts that had been patched rather than properly repaired. She documented everything with her phone camera, taking detailed photos of each deficiency. Then, she sought out Major Patterson, finding him in the operations center as he prepared for the morning briefing. "Major, we have a problem," Elena said without preamble. "The vehicle fleet is not safe for convoy operations." Patterson looked up from his computer, irritation flashing across his face. "What kind of problem?" Elena handed him a printed summary she'd prepared. Critical safety deficiencies across multiple vehicles, brake failures, steering problems, transmission issues that could strand a patrol in hostile territory. Patterson scanned the report, his expression growing more serious as he read. How bad are we talking? 12 vehicles need immediate grounding pending major repairs. The convoy scheduled for OS 800 cannot proceed with current equipment. Jesus, Patterson muttered. Do you have documentation? Elena produced her phone, scrolling through dozens of high-resolution photos that showed each deficiency in clinical detail. The images were professionally composed, well-lit, and annotated with technical specifications that went far beyond basic automotive knowledge. Patterson studied the photos with growing alarm. This is thorough. How did you identify all this overnight? I've seen similar problems before, Elena said simply, in other contracts. What kind of contracts involve this level of mechanical analysis? For just a moment, Elena hesitated. The question probed too close to information that Elena Vasquez, automotive specialist, wouldn't have. Government fleet maintenance, she said finally. Different agency, similar equipment. Patterson accepted this explanation, but something in Elena's manner, the precision of her documentation, the professional quality of her analysis, suggested expertise that extended well beyond turning wrenches. I need to brief the general immediately. This affects operational readiness. 20 minutes later, Elena found herself back in the briefing room, this time standing at the front as Patterson presented her findings to the senior staff. General Morrison sat at the head of the table, his expression growing darker as the extent of the problems became clear. So you're telling me, Morrison said slowly, that a civilian contractor discovered critical safety deficiencies that our own maintenance staff missed. Sir, Ms. Vasquez conducted an exceptionally thorough inspection, Patterson began. I'm not talking to you, Major, Morrison snapped, his eyes fixed on Elena like targeting lasers. I'm talking to the contractor who claims our entire fleet is unsafe. Elena stood at parade rest, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that was unconsciously military. Sir, I've documented specific deficiencies that pose immediate safety risks. The photos and technical analysis are available for review. Morrison's aide passed him Elena's phone, and the general scrolled through the images with increasing frustration. The documentation was undeniably professional, the analysis clearly expert level. But admitting that would require acknowledging that a civilian contractor had identified problems his own staff had missed. How do I know you didn't cause these problems yourself? Morrison demanded. Convenient that you discover all these deficiencies right when I'm evaluating base readiness. A murmur of discomfort rippled through the room. Several officers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with Morrison's accusation. Elena's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, a subtle straightening, a barely perceptible squaring of shoulders. Sir, the wear patterns indicate long-term degradation, not recent damage. The metallurgical stress fractures alone would require months to develop under normal operational conditions. Morrison's eyes narrowed. Metallurgical stress fractures? That's awfully technical language for a mechanic. Sir, proper diagnosis requires understanding the underlying material science. Steel fatigue has predictable characteristics that can be identified through— Stop! Morrison commanded. I don't need a lecture on materials science from someone who learned automotive repair at a community college. Elena fell silent, but Lieutenant Torres noticed something strange. Her breathing had become perfectly controlled, her stance had shifted into something that looked almost like attention, and her eyes had taken on a quality he'd seen before in senior NCOs who were maintaining discipline in the face of poor leadership. Major Patterson, Morrison continued, how do we verify these alleged problems? Sir, I recommend we bring in a qualified inspector from— No, Morrison interrupted. We'll handle this internally. Sergeant Kowalski can conduct a proper inspection using qualified military personnel. Elena spoke up quietly. Sir, with respect, some of these deficiencies require specialized diagnostic equipment. Morrison's hand slammed onto the table with a sound like a gunshot. Did I ask for your opinion, contractor? The room went dead silent. Elena stood perfectly still, her training taking over in ways that Elena Vasquez shouldn't possess. Her breathing remained controlled, her posture unchanged, but her eyes had gone flat and analytical, the look of someone assessing a threat. "No, sir," she said simply. "Good. From now on, you speak when spoken to and not before. This is a military base, not a civilian garage where everyone gets to voice their opinions." Elena nodded once, a sharp movement that was more acknowledgement than agreement. As the briefing continued around her, she mentally reviewed the vehicles she'd inspected, the deficiencies she'd found, and the patrol scheduled to depart in 4 hours with equipment she knew was unsafe. She had documented the problems. She had reported through proper channels. She had done everything Elena Vasquez, civilian contractor, was supposed to do. But as she watched Morrison dismiss her concerns with bureaucratic arrogance, she began to consider what else might be necessary. Because 12 vehicles with critical safety deficiencies weren't just maintenance problems. They were death traps waiting to claim the lives of soldiers who trusted their equipment to bring them home. And preventing those deaths might require more than Elena Vasquez could officially provide. The convoy departed Bagram at 0800 hours with 12 vehicles that Elena knew shouldn't be on the road. She watched from the motor pool as the Humvees and MRAPs rolled through the main gate, their crews confident in equipment that could fail them at the worst possible moment. The sick feeling in her stomach was familiar. The weight of knowledge that others didn't possess, the burden of seeing threats that remained invisible until they became catastrophic. For 3 hours, she tried to focus on routine maintenance tasks, but her attention kept drifting to the radio chatter filtering through the motor pool speakers. Normal patrol communications, nothing urgent, just the rhythmic check-ins that marked progress through predetermined waypoints. Then, at 11:47 hours, everything changed. "Base, this is Convoy Alpha 7, the radio crackled with strain. "We have a vehicle down, mechanical failure, requesting immediate assistance." Elena's hands stopped moving on the engine she was working on. Around the motor pool, other mechanics paused to listen as the situation developed. "Alpha 7, this is Base. What is the nature of your mechanical failure?" "Complete brake failure on lead vehicle. Nearly went off the road on a switchback. We're stopped on Route Viking. Grid reference follows." Elena felt her blood turn to ice. Route Viking wound through mountainous terrain where brake failure could send a vehicle tumbling down 1,000-foot drops. She had documented stress fractures in the brake systems of 6 vehicles. The convoy had taken 8. The radio traffic continued, painting a picture that grew worse by the minute. The lead Humvee had lost its brakes completely while navigating a steep mountain road. Only the quick thinking of its driver, who had downshifted and used the emergency brake, had prevented a catastrophic accident. But now the convoy was stranded in hostile territory with 1 disabled vehicle. "Alpha 7, can you conduct field repairs?" "Negative, Base. Brake lines are completely severed. We need a tow and replacement vehicle." Elena was already moving, stripping off her coveralls to reveal the tactical clothing she wore underneath. Not standard contractor gear, but the kind of high-end tactical wear favored by operators who valued function over fashion. She grabbed her go bag, a compact kit that contained tools and equipment that went far beyond basic automotive repair. Sergeant Kowalski intercepted her at the motor pool exit. "Where are you going, Vasquez?" "The convoy needs mechanical assistance. I can provide field repairs." Kowalski shook his head. "Negative. Civilians don't go outside the wire. That's policy." Elena's voice took on an edge that Kowalski had never heard before. "Sergeant, those men are sitting ducks in hostile territory because of mechanical failures I identified this morning. General Morrison chose to ignore my warnings. I'm not going to let soldiers die because of bureaucratic pride." Something in her tone made Kowalski step back. Elena's entire demeanor had shifted. The quiet, deferential contractor was gone, replaced by someone who spoke with the authority of experience and training that didn't appear on any resume. "You can't just commandeer a vehicle and drive into a combat zone," Kowalski protested. "Watch me," Elena said, and walked past him toward the vehicle depot. She found Lieutenant Torres in the operations center, monitoring the convoy's situation on multiple radio frequencies. When he saw Elena approaching with her tactical kit, his eyebrows rose. "Elena, what are you doing?" "I need transport to the convoy location. Those brake failures were predictable and preventable. I can conduct field repairs and get them moving. Torres looked uncertain. General Morrison specifically ordered that no civilians participate in recovery operations. Elena met his eyes with a steady gaze. Lieutenant, how many combat deployments have you completed? The question caught Torres off guard. This is my first deployment. Why? Because I need you to understand something. Right now, 8 vehicles are sitting in the middle of Indian country with potential mechanical failures that could strand them overnight. Every minute they remain stationary increases the risk of contact with hostile forces. Field repairs are the fastest solution. Torres hesitated. Elena's assessment was tactically sound, but Morrison's orders were explicit. As he wavered, the radio crackled again. Base Alpha 7, we've got movement on the ridgeline, approximately 800 meters north of our position. Possible enemy observation. The operations center went silent. Everyone understood the implications. If enemy forces were positioning to observe the convoy, an attack was likely imminent. Elena stepped closer to Torres, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Lieutenant, those men need help now. I can provide it, but I need you to make a command decision. If you're hooked on this story of courage under pressure, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss these inspiring military stories. Your support helps us honor more heroes like this. Torres looked at Elena, really looked at her for the first time. Her tactical gear was professional grade, her bearing had shifted into something unmistakably military, and her eyes held the kind of calm focus he'd only seen in experienced NCOs. What exactly are you proposing? He asked quietly. Elena was already moving toward the door. I'm proposing to save those soldiers' lives. The how is my responsibility. Without waiting for permission, she strode out of the operations center and headed for the vehicle depot. Torres watched her go, then made a decision that would define his career. He grabbed his radio and called the motor pool. Sergeant Kowalski, this is Lieutenant Torres. Prepare a utility vehicle for immediate departure. Ms. Vasquez is authorized for convoy support operations. Sir, General Morrison specifically. Sergeant, I'm giving you a direct order. Prep the vehicle, now. 20 minutes later, Elena was racing across the Afghan countryside in a heavily armored MRAP, her driver a nervous private who kept glancing at her tactical gear. She had shed the last vestiges of Elena Vasquez, automotive specialist. Her movements were precise, her equipment check professional, and her radio communications crisp and efficient. Alpha 7, this is maintenance support. ETA to your position 15 minutes. Prep the damaged vehicle for field repairs. Maintenance support, this is Alpha 7 actual. Who is this? We weren't expecting civilian support. Elena keyed her radio, her voice carrying an authority that made the private beside her sit up straighter. Alpha 7, mechanical expertise is en route. Prep for immediate repairs and resumption of mission. Copy maintenance support. As they approached the convoy's position, Elena could see the tactical situation developing. 8 vehicles were stopped on a narrow mountain road with steep drops on both sides. The lead Humvee sat disabled, its crew maintaining security while scanning the surrounding ridgelines. In the distance, barely visible, she could see movement that suggested enemy observation. Elena's vehicle pulled up behind the convoy, and she was out before it fully stopped. The convoy commander, a captain named Martinez, approached with obvious relief. Thank God. How long for repairs? Elena was already examining the damaged brake system, her assessment swift and professional. 30 minutes for a field fix, Captain, but I need to check the other vehicles first. Other vehicles? Elena moved to the second Humvee in line and dropped to examine its brake assembly. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Stress fractures were visible in 2 more vehicles, failures that could occur at any moment. Captain, we have multiple vehicles with critical brake deficiencies. This convoy cannot continue with current equipment. Martinez's face went pale. What are you talking about? These vehicles passed inspection yesterday. Elena's voice was calm but urgent. Sir, the inspections missed systematic maintenance failures. I documented these problems this morning and was overruled by General Morrison. Jesus Christ, Martinez muttered. So what do we do? Elena was already pulling specialized tools from her kit, equipment that was far more advanced than anything a basic automotive specialist would carry. I can conduct field repairs on the critical systems, but we need to move fast. That ridge movement suggests we're being observed. As Elena worked, the convoy's soldiers watched with growing amazement. Her toolkit contained diagnostic equipment they'd never seen before. Her repair techniques were swift and precise, indicating training and experience that went far beyond community college automotive programs. Most telling of all, her tactical awareness was constant. She worked with one eye on her repairs and the other on the surrounding terrain. Staff Sergeant Williams, the convoy's senior NCO, crouched beside Elena as she worked on the third vehicle. "Ma'am, I don't mean to pry, but what's your actual background? This isn't basic mechanical work." Elena paused in her work, meeting Williams's eyes. For a moment the mask slipped, revealing something hard and experienced underneath. "Sergeant, right now my background is less important than getting your people home alive." Williams nodded slowly. He'd served with enough operators over the years to recognize the signs: the professional calm under pressure, the advanced equipment, the tactical awareness that never turned off. Elena Vasquez might be a civilian contractor on paper, but the woman working on his convoy's vehicles was something else entirely. "Alpha 7, this is Overwatch." The radio call came from a sniper team positioned on a nearby ridgeline. "We've got multiple insurgents moving into position approximately 1,200 meters north of convoy location. Count 6 to 8 individuals with weapons." Elena's hands never stopped moving on the brake repair, but her voice was sharp when she keyed her radio. "Alpha 7 actual, timeline for enemy contact." "Maintenance support, how did you know to—" "Captain, timeline?" Martinez understood the urgency. "Overwatch, estimated time to effective range?" "Alpha 7, based on their movement speed and terrain, 15 to 20 minutes before they can establish firing positions." Elena finished the brake repair and moved to the fourth vehicle. Her work pace had increased, but her precision remained perfect. As she worked, she called out to the convoy's soldiers, "I need all drivers to test brake response immediately. Full pedal pressure, check for fade or sponginess." The tests revealed what Elena already knew. 2 more vehicles had brake systems that could fail without warning. She moved to repair them with swift efficiency, her movements economical and practiced. But as she worked on the 6th vehicle, the radio chatter took an ominous turn. "Alpha 7, Overwatch. Enemy forces have reached firing positions. We're seeing weapon setup, possible RPG teams." Elena's voice cut through the radio traffic with unmistakable authority. "Alpha 7 actual. Initiate movement immediately. I'll complete repairs on the move." "Maintenance support, we can't move with you still working." "Captain, I said initiate movement now." Martinez hesitated for only a moment, then recognized the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed under fire. "Alpha 7, prepare for immediate movement. Stay tight, watch your intervals." As the convoy began to roll, Elena performed the impossible, conducting precision mechanical repairs while her vehicle bounced over rough terrain. Her tools were secured with military efficiency, her movements compensating for the vehicle's motion with the kind of adaptability that came from years of working under fire. "Overwatch, Alpha 7 is mobile. Enemy status?" "Alpha 7, you're moving out of their engagement area, but they're repositioning. Recommend maximum speed." Elena finished the final repair as the first rounds began impacting the road behind them, not close enough to cause casualties, but near enough to confirm that her timeline estimates had been accurate. The convoy accelerated, their vehicles now mechanically sound, thanks to field repairs that should have been impossible under the conditions. But as they cleared the danger area, Elena knew that the real crisis was just beginning, because word of what had happened would reach General Morrison within hours, and she had just revealed capabilities that Elena Vasquez, civilian contractor, wasn't supposed to possess. The quiet automotive specialist was about to become a very public problem. The convoy rolled through Bagram's main gate at 16:30 hours, dusty and intact, but carrying a story that would ripple through the base like wildfire. Elena sat in the passenger seat of her escort vehicle, her tactical gear stowed, her coveralls back in place, already transitioning back into the role of Elena Vasquez. But the transformation felt different this time, less complete, less convincing. Captain Martinez was waiting in the motor pool when they arrived, his expression a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Ms. Vasquez, I need to speak with you." Elena nodded, following Martinez to a quiet corner of the maintenance bay. Around them, mechanics and soldiers who had heard radio chatter from the convoy were watching with obvious curiosity. "What you did out there," Martinez began, "that wasn't basic automotive repair. The speed, the precision, the equipment you used, I've never seen anything like it." Elena's response was carefully neutral. "Emergency field repairs require different techniques than shop maintenance." Martinez studied her face, searching for something. "The tactical awareness, the way you assessed the threat timeline, the authority in your voice when you gave orders, that's not civilian contractor training. Captain, I'm grateful the convoy made it back safely. That's what matters." But Martinez wasn't satisfied. "Ms. Vasquez, I've served with special operations units. I know what professional competence looks like. What you demonstrated today goes far beyond automotive expertise." Before Elena could respond, the motor pool doors burst open and General Morrison strode in, his face dark with fury. Behind him came Major Patterson, Lieutenant Torres, and several other officers, creating an impromptu audience for what was clearly going to be a confrontation. "Vasquez!" Morrison's voice echoed across the motor pool. "Front and center." Elena moved to face Morrison, her posture unconsciously snapping to attention before she caught herself and relaxed into a more civilian stance. The brief military bearing wasn't lost on the soldiers watching. Morrison advanced until he was standing directly in front of Elena, his face inches from hers. "Did you, or did you not directly violate my orders by leaving this base without authorization?" "Sir, the convoy required mechanical assistance. I didn't ask for explanations. I asked for a yes or no answer." Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, sir. I left the base to provide emergency repairs. Against direct orders, against established protocols, against every regulation that governs civilian contractor behavior on this installation." Around the motor pool, soldiers were gathering to watch the confrontation. Word had spread quickly about Elena's field repairs, and many were curious to see how Morrison would handle someone who had potentially saved lives by breaking his rules. "Furthermore," Morrison continued, "I've received reports that you exceeded your authority by giving tactical directions to military personnel under fire. Is that correct?" Elena's eyes remained fixed on Morrison's face. "Sir, I provided technical guidance regarding vehicle capabilities and repair timelines." "Technical guidance?" Morrison's voice rose. "Captain Martinez reports that you gave direct orders with the authority of a field commander, that you assessed enemy movement and made tactical recommendations, that you conducted repairs under fire with equipment and techniques that suggest advanced military training." A murmur went through the watching soldiers. The implications of Morrison's words were clear. Elena had demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond her official role. "Sir," Elena said carefully, "I provided the assistance necessary to ensure the convoy's safe return." Morrison's face was flushed with anger and something else, a growing suspicion that he was dealing with something more complex than an insubordinate contractor. "Show me your repair kit." Elena hesitated for just a moment, then retrieved her tactical bag and placed it on a nearby workbench. Morrison unzipped it and began pulling out contents, his expression growing more puzzled with each item. Advanced diagnostic scanners worth thousands of dollars, specialized tools that weren't available through civilian suppliers, communications equipment that required military clearances to possess, tactical medical supplies that suggested training in battlefield medicine. "What the hell is all this?" Morrison demanded, holding up a piece of equipment that none of the watching soldiers recognized. Elena's voice remained steady. "Specialized automotive diagnostic tools." "This isn't automotive equipment," Morrison's voice cracked with frustration. "This is military-grade tactical gear, communications equipment, medical supplies." The crowd of watching soldiers had grown, and among them, Elena noticed several faces that showed recognition rather than confusion. Staff Sergeant Williams from the convoy was studying her gear with the kind of knowledge that came from working with special operations units. Master Sergeant Cole, the base's senior maintenance NCO, was looking at her tools with obvious understanding of their true capabilities. Morrison pulled out the final item from Elena's bag, her notebook. The same worn notebook she'd carried at every duty station, in every identity, containing observations and information that spanned multiple deployments and operations. He opened it and began reading, his expression shifting from anger to confusion to something approaching alarm. The entries were in multiple languages. The handwriting was precise, professional. The content referenced locations, operations, and tactical assessments that no civilian contractor should possess. "What is this?" Morrison's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. Elena's mask was starting to slip. Her breathing had become controlled, military. Her posture was shifting into something unmistakably professional. "Personal notes," Morrison read aloud from the notebook. "Base security assessment, 3 primary vulnerabilities identified. Personnel rotation patterns suggest inadequate overlap in key positions. Communications protocols standard but predictable." The motor pool had gone completely silent. Morrison looked up from the notebook, his face pale. "This reads like an intelligence assessment." Elena said nothing, but her entire demeanor had changed. The deferential contractor was gone, replaced by someone whose presence commanded attention without effort. Master Sergeant Cole stepped forward from the crowd. "General, permission to speak?" Morrison nodded absently, still staring at the notebook. "Sir, I've worked with that diagnostic equipment before. 3 deployments ago, Iraq. It was used by a contractor team that conducted vehicle assessments for special operations units." Morrison's head snapped up. "What kind of contractor team?" Cole's voice was careful, respectful, but certain. "Sir, the kind that requires security clearances above my pay grade." A ripple of understanding moved through the crowd. Elena stood perfectly still, watching Morrison process the implications. Around them, soldiers who had dismissed her for months were beginning to see her differently, not as a contractor who had gotten lucky, but as someone whose true capabilities had been hidden in plain sight. Lieutenant Torres pushed through the crowd, his face tense. "General, I need to speak with you privately." "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here," Morrison snapped. Torres glanced at Elena, then back at Morrison. "Sir, I just received a call from CENTCOM. They're asking about the status of a contractor named Elena Vasquez." Morrison's face went completely white. "CENTCOM?" "Yes, sir. Specifically, they wanted confirmation that she was still assigned to this base and whether she had been involved in any unusual activities." The pieces were falling into place with a clarity that made Morrison's stomach drop. Elena Vasquez wasn't just a contractor. She was something else entirely, something important enough that Central Command was monitoring her activities. Morrison looked back at Elena, really seeing her for the first time. The perfect military posture she was trying to suppress, the calm assessment in her eyes as she evaluated every person in the room. The equipment that belonged to operators, not mechanics. His voice when he spoke was barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" Elena met his eyes steadily. For a moment the mask slipped completely, revealing something hard and experienced and infinitely dangerous. "Sir, I'm exactly who my identification says I am. Elena Vasquez, civilian contractor, automotive specialist." But everyone in the motor pool could see that she was lying, and from the way she stood, from the way she watched Morrison with the patience of a predator, they could also see that she wasn't afraid of the consequences. Because Elena Vasquez might be in trouble, but whoever she really was had been in much worse situations and had always found a way to survive. The secure conference room in the base headquarters felt smaller with each passing minute, as Morrison waited for the encrypted video call that would either validate his growing suspicions or make him look like a paranoid fool. Elena sat across from him, flanked by Major Patterson and the base's intelligence officer, Captain Reynolds. She had maintained perfect composure for the past hour, answering questions with the same calm professionalism she'd shown since arriving at Bagram. But Morrison noticed details now that he'd missed before, the way she sat with perfect posture without appearing stiff, how her eyes automatically tracked everyone who entered the room, the fact that her hands remained relaxed but positioned for instant movement. The secure phone rang at exactly 1800 hours. "General Morrison, this is Colonel Janet Stevens, CENTCOM Special Operations Liaison. I understand you have questions about one of your contractors." Morrison activated the speakerphone, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. "Colonel, I need verification of the background and authorization level for Elena Vasquez, currently assigned to motor pool operations. There was a pause on the line. General, before we proceed, I need to confirm that Ms. Vasquez is present for this conversation. Elena leaned forward slightly. This is Elena Vasquez, Colonel. Ms. Vasquez, please confirm your service number. Elena's voice was steady as she recited a long alphanumeric sequence that made Captain Reynolds look up sharply from his notes. Military service numbers followed specific patterns, and the one Elena had just provided didn't match any standard format Reynolds recognized. Thank you, Colonel Stevens said. General Morrison, what specific concerns do you have regarding Ms. Vasquez? Morrison launched into a detailed account of the day's events. Elena's unauthorized departure from base, her advanced tactical equipment, her apparent command authority during the convoy rescue, and the intelligence-grade assessments in her notebook. As he spoke, Elena's expression remained neutral, but something subtle shifted in the room's atmosphere. The other officers began studying her more intently, noting details they'd overlooked, the way she breathed in controlled patterns, how she seemed to process information from multiple sources simultaneously, the fact that she never appeared surprised by anything Morrison revealed. Colonel, Morrison concluded, I believe Ms. Vasquez has misrepresented her qualifications and may be operating under false pretenses. The pause that followed stretched uncomfortably long. General Morrison, Colonel Stevens finally said, I'm going to transfer you to someone with appropriate clearance to discuss this matter. The hold music that followed was brief, replaced by a new voice, male, authoritative, with the kind of measured tone that suggested very high rank. General Morrison, this is General Bradley Cross, JSOC Operations. I understand you have concerns about one of our assets. Morrison felt the blood drain from his face. Joint Special Operations Command didn't get involved in routine contractor disputes. JSOC dealt with the military's most sensitive operations, the kind that rarely appeared in official records. Sir, I'm not sure what you mean by asset, Morrison said carefully. General, the individual you know as Elena Vasquez is operating under deep cover on assignment from my command. Her mission parameters include maintaining civilian contractor identity while conducting specialized assessments of forward operating base security and operational readiness. The room went completely silent. Elena sat motionless, but Morrison noticed that her hands had moved to rest flat on the table, a posture that suggested readiness rather than relaxation. Sir, Morrison's voice cracked slightly. She violated direct orders by leaving the base without authorization. General, her orders from this command supersede any local restrictions when they conflict with mission requirements or personnel safety. The convoy rescue fell under both categories. Major Patterson leaned forward, his face pale. Sir, what exactly is Ms. Vasquez's actual role? General Cross's answer came after a long pause. Ms. Vasquez is what we call a gray operator, a highly trained specialist who conducts assessments and interventions while maintaining civilian cover. Her background includes multiple combat deployments, advanced tactical training, and expertise in areas that I cannot discuss over unsecured channels. Morrison stared at Elena, who met his gaze with the same calm expression she'd worn since arriving at Bagram. But now he understood what he was seeing, not the patience of a deferential contractor, but the watchfulness of someone accustomed to operating in hostile environments. Her cover identity as an automotive specialist allows her to access and evaluate critical infrastructure while remaining invisible to both friendly and hostile observation. Today's actions were necessary to prevent casualties and maintain operational security. Sir, Morrison said slowly, how long has this assessment been ongoing? Ms. Vasquez has been observing base operations for 3 months. Her preliminary reports have identified several significant security vulnerabilities and operational deficiencies. Morrison's stomach dropped as he realized the implications. For 3 months, Elena had been watching, evaluating, documenting every aspect of base operations. Every mistake, every security lapse, every leadership failure had been noted by someone whose reports went directly to the highest levels of military command. Captain Reynolds cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, what happens now?" "That depends," General Cross said, "on General Morrison's response to this information. Ms. Vasquez's mission can continue under current parameters, or we can extract her and conduct our assessment through more visible means." The threat was politely phrased but unmistakable. Morrison could either cooperate with an ongoing JSOC operation or face the consequences of interfering with it. Elena spoke for the first time since confirming her service number. "General Cross, permission to address the situation directly?" "Granted." Elena turned to face Morrison, and for the first time since their confrontation began, she allowed her mask to slip completely. What Morrison saw was intelligence, competence, and a kind of professional authority that made his earlier behavior seem not just wrong, but embarrassingly amateur. "General Morrison," Elena said, her voice carrying a command presence that filled the room, "my assessment of base operations has identified critical deficiencies in vehicle maintenance protocols, security procedures, and personnel management. Today's convoy situation was a direct result of systematic failures in your maintenance oversight program." Morrison found himself listening with the attention he would give to a briefing from a superior officer. Elena's voice had shed every trace of contractor deference, replaced by the crisp authority of someone accustomed to delivering critical intelligence to senior commanders. "The brake system failures were predictable and preventable. I documented the deficiencies and attempted to report them through proper channels. When those reports were dismissed, I was forced to choose between maintaining cover and preventing casualties. I chose to prevent casualties. Your harassment of my cover identity, while personally objectionable, is operationally irrelevant. However, your systematic dismissal of critical safety information represents a command failure that directly endangered personnel under your authority." The room was absolutely silent. Elena's words were delivered without emotion, but their impact was devastating. She had just provided a professional assessment of Morrison's leadership that would undoubtedly be included in her final report to JSOC. General Cross's voice came through the speakerphone with unmistakable finality. "General Morrison, Ms. Vasquez will continue her mission under current parameters. You will provide full cooperation and cease any interference with her activities. Is that understood?" Morrison's throat felt dry as he answered, "Yes, sir." "Ms. Vasquez, estimated timeline for mission completion." Elena's response was immediate, professional. "Sir, 2 weeks for final documentation and assessment compilation." "Acknowledged. General Morrison, you will receive my personal assessment of this incident within 72 hours. The line went dead, leaving the 5 people in the room to process what had just happened. Elena sat back in her chair, the mask of Elena Vasquez settling back into place, but not quite as completely as before. Morrison stared at her, finally understanding that for 3 months he had been not just observed, but evaluated by someone whose opinion would influence his career in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. The woman he had dismissed as an incompetent contractor was actually one of the military's most elite specialists, and she had just witnessed him at his absolute worst. "Ma'am," Morrison said quietly, the honorific feeling strange on his tongue, "I owe you an apology." Elena's expression didn't change. "General, my personal feelings are irrelevant. What matters is that personnel safety protocols are properly maintained and that command decisions prioritize mission success over personal convenience." The words were polite, professional, and utterly damning. Morrison realized that he had just been given a lesson in leadership by someone whose qualifications made his own seem pedestrian by comparison. As the meeting broke up, Elena gathered her materials with the same efficient movements she'd used since arriving at Bagram. But now everyone in the room understood what they were seeing, not the actions of a contractor trying to fit in, but the practiced motions of an operator who had been playing a role. Morrison watched her leave, knowing that his career would never recover from the mistake of underestimating someone who had been invisible precisely because she was so far beyond anything he had the experience to recognize. Elena Vasquez, civilian contractor, had just revealed herself to be someone whose true identity would haunt his nightmares for years to come. Word traveled through Bagram Air Base like wildfire in dry grass. By evening chow, every soldier, airman, and Marine on the installation had heard some version of the story. The quiet contractor in the motor pool was actually a JSOC operator. General Morrison had been publicly dressed down by Central Command, and Elena Vasquez was someone whose true identity made her untouchable. Elena sat alone in the contractor section of the dining facility, eating her meal with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. But the atmosphere around her had changed completely. Conversation stopped when she passed. Soldiers who had ignored her for months now watched her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Staff Sergeant Williams approached her table, his dinner tray in hand. "Ma'am, mind if I join you?" Elena gestured to the empty chair across from her. Williams sat down, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. "I wanted to thank you," Williams said quietly. "For today, that convoy would have been in real trouble without your intervention." Elena nodded acknowledgement, but said nothing. Williams leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking about the past 3 months, all the times you were around when something went sideways. The MR app that broke down during the night patrol 2 weeks ago, you were there within minutes with exactly the right parts. The communications failure during last month's perimeter sweep, you had it fixed before our tech specialist even diagnosed the problem." Elena continued eating, but Williams saw something flicker in her eyes, recognition that her pattern of interventions had been noticed. "You've been watching out for us this whole time, haven't you?" Williams said. "Not just maintaining vehicles, protecting people." Before Elena could respond, the dining facility's ambient noise began to change. Conversations were trailing off, replaced by an expectant silence that started at the front entrance and spread like a wave across the large room. Elena looked up to see General Morrison entering the dining facility, flanked by his aide and several senior officers. Morrison's face was drawn, his bearing stiff with the kind of formal composure that suggested he was operating under direct orders from higher command. The general moved through the facility with purpose, his eyes scanning until they found Elena's table. When their gazes met across the crowded room, Morrison's jaw tightened, but he began walking directly toward her. The silence in the dining facility became absolute. 300 service members watched as their commanding general crossed the room to approach a woman they had dismissed as just another contractor. Morrison stopped directly in front of Elena's table. Elena began to rise, but Morrison held up a hand. "Remain seated," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the silent space. Then, in a movement that sent shockwaves through every witness, General Morrison came to attention and rendered the sharpest, most precise salute of his career. The effect was instantaneous and electric. Elena, moving with instinctive military bearing, rose and returned the salute with equal precision. For a moment that seemed to stretch into infinity, the 2-star general held his salute to a woman in coveralls whose true rank and authority were suddenly, blindingly clear. When Morrison finally dropped his hand, he spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the dining facility. "On behalf of this command, I want to thank you for your service and your dedication to the safety of our personnel. Your actions today potentially saved multiple lives, and your professionalism under difficult circumstances reflects the highest standards of military excellence." Elena's response was quietly professional. "Thank you, sir." But Morrison wasn't finished. "I also want to publicly acknowledge that my behavior toward you over the past weeks was inappropriate and unprofessional. You deserved better from this command, and I failed to provide it." The admission hung in the air like thunder. A general officer publicly apologizing to a subordinate was unprecedented, but everyone in the room understood they were witnessing something even more extraordinary. A career military officer acknowledging that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. Morrison took a step back, his voice growing stronger. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand something. The woman you know as Elena Vasquez has served this nation with distinction in capacities that most of us cannot imagine. She has operated in environments where mistakes cost lives, where courage is measured not by what you're willing to risk, but by what you're willing to sacrifice to protect others. Around the dining facility, Elena could see soldiers reassessing everything they thought they knew. The quiet contractor who had fixed their vehicles without complaint, who had worked late into the night to ensure their equipment was ready, who had somehow always been available when problems arose. She wasn't just competent. She was one of them, operating at a level most of them could only aspire to reach. Staff Sergeant Williams was the first to stand. He pushed his chair back and came to attention, rendering a salute that was sharp with newfound respect. "Ma'am, it has been an honor serving on the same base." The movement spread like wildfire. Master Sergeant Cole stood and saluted. Then Lieutenant Torres. Then the entire table of Marines near the entrance. Within 30 seconds, every service member in the dining facility was on their feet, standing at attention, saluting a woman whose true identity had just rewritten everything they thought they understood about competence, courage, and quiet professionalism. Elena stood in the center of the storm, accepting the salutes with the dignity of someone who had earned every gesture of respect. But her eyes found Morrison's, and in that gaze was something more complex than triumph. Acknowledgement that this moment, while necessary, came at the cost of the invisibility that had made her so effective. The sound of 300 people standing simultaneously, boots hitting the floor in unison, chairs scraping back in perfect synchronization, created a thunder that seemed to shake the building itself. And in that moment, everyone present understood that they were witnessing not just recognition, but transformation. Of their own understanding, of their assumptions, of what it meant to serve with quiet excellence. Elena held the moment for exactly the appropriate duration, then raised her voice with the authority of someone accustomed to addressing formations. "Thank you. Please, return to your meals." As the dining facility slowly returned to normal, Elena sat back down. But the world around her had changed forever. The mask of Elena Vasquez had not just slipped, it had been publicly and irreversibly removed. Later that evening, General Morrison sat alone in his office, staring at a computer screen that displayed Elena's actual service record, the classified version that JSOC had finally authorized him to view. Each line of text was another blow to his professional ego, another reminder of just how catastrophically he had misjudged the situation. Elena Vasquez didn't exist. The woman he had spent 3 months harassing was actually Major Sarah Elizabeth Chen, United States Army Special Forces, with a service record that read like a catalog of the military's most dangerous and sensitive operations. Afghanistan, 2018 to 2019, embedded with Afghan Special Forces conducting cross-border operations into Pakistan. Silver Star for actions during a rescue mission that saved the lives of 12 captured coalition personnel. Iraq, 2020-2021, attached to Task Force 121 for high-value target missions. Bronze Star with V device for single-handedly eliminating an enemy weapons cache that threatened coalition supply lines. Syria, 2022, classified operations designation Operation Silent Reach. Details redacted, but the commendation letters from both CIA and JSOC suggested activities that went well beyond standard military operations. Morrison closed the file and rubbed his temples. Major Chen wasn't just a special operations officer. She was one of the military's most elite specialists, someone whose expertise was so valuable that JSOC deployed her under deep cover to assess and fix problems that traditional military hierarchy couldn't address. A knock on his office door interrupted his self-recrimination. "Enter." Major Patterson stepped in, his face grave. "Sir, I have the preliminary report on the vehicle maintenance deficiencies that Ms. Vasquez, Major Chen, identified." Morrison gestured to a chair. "How bad?" Patterson placed a thick folder on the desk. "Sir, it's worse than we initially understood. The brake failures were part of a systematic maintenance breakdown that affects nearly 30% of our vehicle fleet. If Major Chen hadn't forced the issue today, we were looking at multiple catastrophic failures within the next 2 weeks." "Jesus," Morrison muttered. "Sir, there's more. I've been reviewing Major Chen's repair logs from the past 3 months. She's been conducting unauthorized repairs and parts replacements on vehicles that showed early signs of the same deficiencies. She's been preventing failures before they occurred, essentially covering for our maintenance program's shortcomings. Morrison stared at the folder without opening it. She's been protecting our soldiers from our own incompetence. Yes, sir. And she's been doing it while maintaining perfect operational security. None of her interventions were obvious enough to blow her cover, but all of them prevented potential casualties. Patterson hesitated, before continuing. Sir, I've also been reviewing your interactions with Major Chen over the past weeks. Morrison's stomach clenched. And? Sir, her responses to your harassment demonstrate remarkable restraint. She maintained her cover identity while being publicly humiliated, followed orders that contradicted her professional judgment, and never once compromised operational security despite having every justification to do so. The weight of Morrison's behavior over the past months settled on him like a physical burden. He had spent weeks publicly undermining someone whose little finger contained more operational experience than his entire career. Worse, he had done it in front of subordinates who now understood exactly how poor his judgment had been. Patterson, what's the command climate impact? Patterson's expression was carefully neutral. Sir, the troops understand that you were operating without complete information. But they also saw Major Chen maintain perfect professionalism while being treated inappropriately. The contrast is notable. Morrison nodded slowly. He had been outclassed by someone operating at a level he couldn't comprehend, and everyone on base had witnessed it. His authority as a commander had been irreparably damaged, not by Major Chen's revelation, but by his own behavior in the face of her quiet competence. Another knock on the door interrupted them. Morrison's aide entered with a message folder marked with the highest classification markings. Sir, priority message from CENTCOM. Morrison opened the folder with hands that weren't entirely steady. The message was brief, direct, and devastating. General Morrison. Preliminary assessment of base operations by JSOC Assets has identified critical deficiencies in leadership, maintenance protocols, and personnel management. Full investigation to commence immediately. Your cooperation required. Relief of command under consideration, pending investigation outcome. General Bradley Cross, JSOC Operations. Morrison closed the folder and looked at Patterson, who had clearly read the message over his shoulder. Sir, Patterson said quietly, what are your orders? Morrison was quiet for a long moment, considering his options. He could fight the investigation, challenge JSOC's authority, attempt to minimize the damage to his career. Or he could do something that might salvage a shred of professional dignity from the wreckage of his command. Patterson, I want you to schedule a base-wide formation for tomorrow morning. Full turnout, all personnel. Sir, what's the purpose? Morrison stood and walked to his window, looking out at the base he had commanded for 6 months and would likely lose within the week. I'm going to do something I should have done 3 months ago. I'm going to listen to someone who actually knows what she's talking about. The next morning, the entire base population stood in formation on the main parade ground. Morrison took his position at the ER podium, with Major Chen, still in her contractor coveralls, standing to his right. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly across the formation. Over the past 24 hours, this command has learned that someone we have known as Elena Vasquez is actually Major Sarah Chen, United States Army Special Forces, operating under the authority of Joint Special Operations Command. A murmur rippled through the formation, though most of the assembled personnel had already heard versions of the story. Major Chen has spent the past 3 months conducting a comprehensive assessment of our operations, identifying deficiencies, and implementing solutions while maintaining perfect operational security. Her work has prevented casualties, improved our readiness, and demonstrated the kind of professional excellence that we should all aspire to achieve. Morrison paused, gathering himself for what he knew would be the most difficult words of his military career. I also want to publicly acknowledge that my treatment of Major Chen over the past weeks was inappropriate, unprofessional, and contrary to the values of this command in the United States military. I allowed personal bias and institutional arrogance to cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I failed not only Major Chen, but every soldier, airman, and Marine under my authority. The formation was absolutely silent, every person present understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented, a general officer taking full responsibility for a failure of leadership. Morrison turned to face Major Chen directly. "Major, I request permission to address you publicly." Elena's response was crisp, professional. "Permission granted, sir." Morrison came to attention and rendered his second public salute to Major Chen in 24 hours. But this time, he held it longer, and his voice when he spoke carried the weight of genuine respect. "Major Chen, your service to this nation and your dedication to the safety of our personnel represent the highest traditions of military excellence. I apologize for my failure to recognize that excellence, and I want every person on this base to understand that you are exactly the kind of soldier we should all strive to become." Elena returned the salute with precision, then stepped forward to the microphone. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to addressing formations under far more difficult circumstances. "Thank you, General Morrison. I want everyone here to understand that the work of protecting our personnel is never the responsibility of one person. It's the responsibility of every leader, every NCO, and every soldier. Excellence isn't about individual recognition. It's about ensuring that everyone goes home safe." As the formation was dismissed, Morrison watched Elena walk away, still in her coveralls, already transitioning back into whatever role came next. He had learned something over the past 24 hours that would define the rest of his career. True expertise was often invisible until circumstances demanded its revelation, and the most dangerous assumption a leader could make was that they understood the full capabilities of the people under their command. Major Sarah Chen had taught him that lesson with professional courtesy and devastating effectiveness, and he would never forget either the lesson or the teacher who had delivered it while maintaining perfect dignity under the worst kind of pressure. 2 weeks later, Major Sarah Chen stood in the same secure conference room where her identity had been revealed, but this time she was dressed in her actual uniform, Army combat fatigues with the distinctive green beret of Special Forces and an array of ribbons that told the story of a career spent in the world's most dangerous places. General Morrison sat across from her, but he was no longer the commanding officer of Bagram Air Base. Colonel Patricia Hayes, Morrison's replacement, occupied that chair now, reviewing the comprehensive assessment that Major Chen had spent 4 months compiling. "Major Chen," Colonel Hayes said, looking up from the thick folder, "this is the most thorough operational assessment I've ever seen. Your recommendations address everything from maintenance protocols to security procedures to personnel management." Elena's response was characteristically measured. "Colonel, the assessment identifies systemic issues that go beyond individual failures. Implementation of the recommendations will require sustained commitment at all levels of command." Hayes nodded, then turned to Morrison. "General, I want to thank you for your cooperation with the transition. Your willingness to implement Major Chen's immediate recommendations has already prevented several potential incidents." Morrison's career was effectively over. He would retire within 6 months rather than face a formal investigation, but he had spent his final weeks at Bagram learning from someone whose expertise had humbled him completely. "Colonel, if I may," Morrison said, "I want to emphasize that Major Chen's recommendations aren't just technical improvements. They're a blueprint for the kind of leadership culture we should have been maintaining all along." Elena looked at Morrison with something that might have been respect. Despite his initial failures, he had ultimately proven capable of growth, and his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes had helped implement changes that would protect future personnel. Colonel Hayes closed the folder and looked directly at Elena. "Major, I understand you're being reassigned. Can you tell me where?" Elena's slight smile suggested that some things remained classified. "Ma'am, wherever quiet professionals are needed." As the meeting concluded, Elena gathered her materials and prepared to leave Bagram for the final time. but as she reached the door, Morrison's voice stopped her. "Major Chen." She turned back to face him. "For what it's worth," Morrison said quietly, "I want you to know that learning from you has been the most valuable professional experience of my career. You've made me a better officer." Elena's expression softened slightly. "General, the measure of a leader isn't whether they make mistakes. It's whether they learn from them and do better. You've done that." After Elena left, Morrison and Colonel Hayes sat in contemplative silence. Finally, Hayes spoke. "How does someone like that just disappear into the system?" she asked. "Someone with her capabilities, her record. Why isn't she running major commands?" Morrison had spent 2 weeks thinking about that question. "Because people like Major Chen don't want to run commands, Colonel. They want to solve problems. And sometimes the most important problems can only be solved by people who are willing to remain invisible while they work." 3 days later, Elena was gone from Bagram Air Base as quietly as she had arrived. Her trailer stood empty, her contractor paperwork filed away, her cover identity retired. Elena Vasquez ceased to exist as completely as she had been created. But the impact of her 4 months at Bagram would resonate for years. Vehicle maintenance protocols were completely overhauled, security procedures were updated, personnel management policies were revised to emphasize competence over compliance. Most importantly, the culture of the base had changed. The story of Elena Vasquez, the quiet contractor who had turned out to be one of the military's most elite operators, became part of the base's institutional memory, a reminder that expertise often came in unexpected forms and that the most valuable people were sometimes the ones who worked without recognition or reward. In the motor pool, Sergeant Kowalski hung a simple plaque where Elena's workstation had been. "Excellence through service, dedicated to all who work in the shadows." Nobody needed to ask what it meant. Everyone who had served at Bagram during those 4 months understood that they had been in the presence of something special, not because of Elena's rank or decorations, but because of her absolute commitment to protecting others while expecting nothing in return. 6 months later, in a different country, under a different name, a quiet woman in civilian clothes began work at another military facility. Her paperwork identified her as a logistics specialist with experience in supply chain management. Her supervisors noted that she was competent but unremarkable, the kind of contractor who did good work without drawing attention to herself. None of them realized that their base had just become significantly safer, their operations more efficient, their personnel better protected. They wouldn't realize it until some future crisis revealed the extent of the quiet improvements that had been taking place around them. Because that was how Major Sarah Chen worked, invisibly, expertly, with a dedication to service that transcended recognition or reward. She moved through the world's most dangerous places under different names, different identities, solving problems that others couldn't see and protecting people who would never know her real name. If this story of quiet heroism and professional excellence resonated with you, please subscribe for more military stories that honor our veterans and active duty personnel. In the comments, tell us about the quiet professionals in your life, the people who work without recognition to make things better for everyone else. They are the true heroes, the ones who measure success not by what they achieve for themselves, but by what they do for others. And remember, strength isn't always loud, courage isn't always visible, and the most important work is often done by people who never ask for credit. Major Sarah Chen represents thousands of quiet professionals who serve with distinction while remaining invisible. Their stories deserve to be told, their sacrifices deserve to be honored, and their example deserves to be remembered. Because in a world that often celebrates the loudest voices and the most visible achievements, it's the quiet ones, the Elena Vasquez's, the Sarah Chen's, the invisible guardians, who often make the greatest difference. They don't do it for glory, they don't do it for recognition, they do it because someone has to, because excellence demands it, and because protecting others is worth any sacrifice. That's the true measure of a warrior, not the battles they win in public, but the ones they fight in silence, where the only reward is knowing that their service made someone else's world a little bit safer. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where are you watching from and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget.